This is May 18th, 2012 in Albany, New York at 1:20 in the afternoon. Ken and June Hunter are interviewing Michael Parmenter, who served in the United States Navy from December 28, 1987 through December 31st, 2007. Please tell us your full name and when and where you were born.
Michael Joseph Parmenter, and I was born on May 19th, 1967 in Waverly, New York.
And what did you do before you entered the military?
I was a paperboy carrier in my local town, and I also worked at McDonald's.
And then why did you go into the service?
My senior year of high school, my grandfather had passed away 2 weeks before my graduation, and that kind of inspired me. Since he was a World War II veteran, kind of inspired me to join the military after his passing later on that year.
All right, now where did you go for your basic training?
I went to Great Lakes outside of Chicago.
Okay, in Illinois.
Yes.
And how did you get out there? Did you fly out? Did you go by train?
I flew out from Scranton, Pennsylvania.
And had you ever flown before?
I think that was my first flight, I think.
Do you remember it very well?
Yeah, I was kind of nervous.
Uh-huh.
What happened to you when you first got into basic training? What kind of routine did you have to go through upon reporting at Great Lakes?
First thing they did was they shuttled everyone into this room and read them a bunch of rules, regulations, and then from there we all were separated up into different companies. And first thing I think everyone got was a haircut, and then a bedroll to where you were sleeping at that night.
They gave you the kind of haircut you wanted?
Yes, it was high and tight, that's for sure.
Okay, and then was it difficult? What type of maneuvers did you have to go through in basic training for the Navy?
There was just a lot of, the regular exercising and calisthenics, and then classroom training. And since it was winter, there was a lot of snow and ice, so we always had to deal with the weather outside and the cold wind. That was the thing I remember the most, was how cold and windy and snowy it was.
Did you go through weapons training at Great Lakes?
Yes.
And what was it like for you?
Scary, since I had never handled a weapon before in my life, and I never was a hunter, and neither was my family, so it was kind of scary at first.
Did they test you to see how qualified you were for in swimming?
Yes.
What was that like?
Swimming was, since I did not know how to swim, I had to go through swimming lessons while I was going through basic also.
And how to dive off the big boards and all?
Yes, a 15-foot diving board, yeah. And I had to learn how to swim in 8 weeks. So.
And did you go through fire training in there, learning how to put out fires in confined areas?
Yes, we had fire training and flooding training. Yeah.
Okay, then where did you go after basic training? Where was your first assignment?
My first assignment was at the Naval Submarine School in Groton, Connecticut. So I flew to Connecticut and went through submarine school to learn all about submarines and how they operate and all their equipment on board and how you live on a submarine, basically.
And how long were you there?
It was I think it was 8 weeks.
Oh, just 8 weeks then. So then, what did you do after that? I mean, where'd you go?
After that, I was assigned to my first submarine, which again I've only flown once by this time. So I flew from there to Charleston, South Carolina, to be on the USS Lewis and Clark.
And you had never sailed before either, had you?
No.
So what happened when you landed there?
Well, I checked in and met this guy named Scott, and he took me under his wing and became my mentor, basically, and showed me around the submarine and how submarine life should be and what I needed to learn to become qualified in submarines.
Now, the berthing that you had on board the submarine, I bet you had a stateroom.
Nope, I had a small little rack down in the bottom of the missile compartment, basically.
Were you in on the complement? Did they have to share the bunks on the bed on the submarine?
Yeah, since I was new, I was definitely part of the hot racking team, and I had to share a bunk with 2 other guys.
And by sharing the bunk, we meant each one got 8 hours
Yes.
because of 8 hours.
If you're lucky to get 8 hours in there, yeah.
And did you have recreational time in a room on the submarine?
They had like a, not really time, they had some time, but usually just, there's a rowing machine and there was a bike, a stationary bike that you could use, and then a running machine that you could use in your off
For
time.
your exercise
For
and all
exercising.
that.
Yeah.
What is a daily routine like on the submarine? What time is reveille for a particular crew?
Well, on the submarine there is really, there's no day and no night. So what we go by is what the cooks are feeding us for food, whether it's breakfast, lunch, or dinner, or what they call midrats, midnight. And the submarine usually is run on a 18-hour shift, so 8 on, or 6 on, 6 off, 6 on, 6 off. So they have 3 shifts that rotate throughout the day.
Now, were there any special duties you had to perform on board the ship? Did you have to have cross-training in different activities?
Yep, you had to know every submariner has to know how all the equipment on the submarine works, just as a basic knowledge of it. Whether you're an expertise at it, or you're like a cook or an admin person like myself, you had to know something about the engineering spaces, something about the weapons spaces, and something about navigation. You had to be cross-trained in all those areas. To become qualified in submarines, you got to know how all the equipment works, as well as the damage control equipment for fire and flooding, in case anything happens.
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned you were in the administrative staff on the submarine. What did you do?
On my first submarine, I was a junior yeoman, which I worked in an administrative office, which did all the correspondence, letters, notices, and instructions, as well as service records for the whole crew, as well as being the captain and executive officer's assistance as far as any daily paperwork that needed to be completed or tasks to be done.
Now, I doubt you sent out a lot of mail when you were at sea.
How
did you keep in touch with family?
Yeah, family then.
Back then we had what they call familygrams that we would do up to like 40 words you could write to your families, and then they would transmit them off the ship, and then they would transcribe them over to the families, and they could get them eventually.
And did you receive mail like that too? Or?
And that's how the crew would receive any letters from families. They would get a familygram with 40 words in it that they could say that the weather's nice, you're nice, I miss you, this is okay, the cat's okay, type of thing.
Uh-huh.
What was an average tour on a submarine? 6 months deployment, 5 months deployment, or you could be gone for a year or better?
The average deployment on a submarine is anywhere from 1 to 2 days, based on what operations they're working on, up to, it could be up to 6 months or longer, depending on what the mission is.
Now, do you remember the first time you actually went out on the submarine and what it was like?
And what was the first experience like when they did your
Dive.
your first dive?
When I first went out to sea on our first deployment, the first thing I noticed was, these are not my sea legs. I was not really seasick, but not very sturdy either. And a lot of my friends and a lot of shipmates were getting seasick and getting sick, and they'd have to go to the restroom or go back to their bunk and lay down and relax and stuff. But definitely when you first go out to the ocean, since the submarine is round on the bottom and not have a regular keel like surface ships, it rolls very easily and you can get seasick easily.
So they don't pass out Dramamine?
Well, if you get sick, you can ask the corpsman for seasick medicine.
Pills, yeah. And then, what was I gonna ask?
Now, you mentioned there were three different crews. They shared the bunks there for 8 hours segments there. You say that the blue crew would have it for 8 hours, the red crew, the orange, or whatever designation they had. Were the meals all the same? Did everybody have to make meals, or did they serve meals to accommodate the men on the various shifts?
Well, basically what they would do is they would cook breakfast, and then they would cook lunch and dinner, and everyone, the shift that was on in the morning shift, if it was, section 1, basically, they would have whatever they were serving for breakfast. Then section 2 would relieve them, and before they would relieve them, they would come up and they would eat their lunch, because that's when they would serve lunch. And then the third section would come in the evening, and they relieve the afternoon section, and they would eat whatever the cooks are cooking for dinner. And then section 1 would come back on at midnight, and whatever leftovers there were to eat is what they would have the leftovers throughout the whole day. Then the day would start over again at midnight.
I assume
So
there
every
was,
6 hours, is 18 hours is how the day went, and then the next 6 was the whole new day. So basically, the submarine day is an 18-hour day. Vice here, we have a 24-hour day.
now, I assume there was always a pot of coffee readily available.
Yep, coffee was the #1 item. I remember running coffee runs many times. Yeah.
What about medical treatment on ship if anybody was injured? Were they able to handle major and minor incidents?
Yep, we had a corpsman stationed on board, plus everyone's trained in some aspects of first aid. Yep, and anything worse than that, we would definitely would get a hold of emergencies and airlift people out if they had to.
So if you were on a dive, could they, did you have experience of several days or months undersea or not?
Yes.
And how would they treat, they wouldn't come up, would they, for that?
They would come up periodically, I guess, to receive messages.
We
or
would
so.
come up periodically to get fresh air and to receive messages and to transmit messages. But as a rule, most submarines, they're made to be underwater, and that's where we stayed.
And did you ever have claustrophobic feelings?
I never did, but I know a few other people had.
I guess
It's
that,
something you got to get used to. Either you're comfortable down there or you're not. It's nothing like you're going to just get comfortable after a couple of days.
I imagine the training at Groton, Connecticut weeds out
Yes.
the people.
Yeah, the submarine training definitely, weeds out the people and also gets you prepared for submarine life. That's why the training exists. Yeah.
So then you stayed in the submarine service then most of your career in the Navy?
Yes, I was in the submarine
Liked
service
it.
my entire career, and then I had shore duty in between each sea commands that I had.
Where was your first, I don't want to call it a cruise, but where did you go for your first activity under the water?
First major missions.
Mission?
My first deployment was just out in the ocean somewhere. I wasn't privy to any information at that time, so I just knew that we were out there to the ocean somewhere, and we did our mission, and we came right back, after 3 months.
Mm-hmm.
And when you came in, did they go through offloading and loading of provisions?
Yes, we offloaded all of our provisions and got new provisions loaded on, and then we went into what they call a stand down period, where you have 2 weeks of rest and relaxation, then you go back into classroom training after that for another few months, and then after that, then you go back to the submarine.
Okay, now you're basically describing the first ship you were on. Was that the USS Lewis and Clark?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Then from there you progressed on to other submarines.
Yes, while I was in Lewis and Clark, I didn't know what I wanted to be, and a lot of people were asking me if I wanted to do what grade I wanted to be, and based on my ASVAB scores, there's a limited few of what I could choose from, and I got to know the people in the admin office really good, so I decided to strike yeoman, and they sent me off to Mississippi to go to yeoman A school, and that's where I became a yeoman. And then after that, I was sent to Connecticut to go on another submarine, the USS Tenosa, and when I checked in there, they said that I was going to be their the records personnel assistant, so I was temporarily stationed at the on base of Groton sub base, and not actually on the Tenosa. I was assigned to the Tenosa, but I'd have to go out to sea with them.
Okay.
Now, did you go through any change of command ceremonies on board a submarine?
Yes.
What's a change of command ceremony like?
Change of command ceremony is very, very military and very, very, very important, and I thought it was very impressive. I saw a change of command ceremony on the USS Kentucky, and when I was on the USS Georgia, and when I was on shore duty, I saw another change of command. It's very, very official, and it's very, very impressive. Like I said, it's a very nice ceremony.
Could you tell, like how they marched in with flags, or what did they do? Tell for the people who've never seen one what to expect.
Change of command ceremony is they have what they call boatswain's mate, and then side boys that boatswain's mate calls them by the pipe, and they line up, and then they introduce the chain of command officials from the junior person to the senior person. The senior person is always called in last, and he leaves first at the end of the ceremony. And they just read off their orders, saying that they're ready to transfer or to relieve command, and then the new person will take over. He'll read his orders, saying he's, relieved the other person of his duties, and he'll assume the duties, and they have a little speech, and then the ceremony is concluded by, they pipe him over the side, and then he departs through the side boys and goes ashore.
Mm-hmm.
Reading over your information that you supplied us, you had quite an extensive area that you traveled through. Is there any places that stands out, especially ports of call that you went to, and how were you greeted when you went into these areas?
My very first, I guess you could say port of call, or at least country that I had been to in the United States, was Scotland. And I was very impressed with Scotland. It was a very nice country, and people were pretty polite. And we had gone to, one afternoon, our section leader arranged for a Liberty trip to Edinburgh, Scotland, which is across the bay, to tour some castles, which I thought was very impressive, being I was only out of high school for a year, and I had been over there, so it's really impressive there. And then on the same submarine, the Lewis and Clark, we had pulled into Portugal, like I mentioned before, and another country I'd never been to before at that time, obviously.
So the Navy did live up to its motto: join the Navy and see the world.
Yes, you definitely can see the world if you join the Navy. Yeah.
And was it hot in Portugal when you were there, or?
Pretty much like the summers are here, 80s, 90s.
And was
Summer.
Scotland cool?
Yeah, Scotland was cooler, kind of like the New England states up here in the fall and spring.
Now, while you were, did the submarines, did they engage in maneuvers with other elements of the Navy, in particular allied nations? Were you ever in any of those? Because when I was in the Navy, we'd always, in the Mediterranean, we'd always be having NATO drills and with the navies from France and from England and Germany.
There may have been, but I was never aware of it or part of it. I know different kinds of submarines are also part of aircraft carrier battle groups, and they go around with the battle groups, but the submarines I was on, we weren't really part of any of those.
Very simple.
We were pretty much by ourselves.
Well, you've been to a lot of places. What were some of the other places you sailed to? And
Well, after I left the Lewis and Clark and Charleston, like I said, I came up to Groton, Connecticut to be on the Tenosa, and then I worked temporarily out of the personnel detachment office on the sub base there. And while there, a friend of mine and I decided to switch duties. So him and I switched. He went to the Tenosa, and I went to his ship, the Pargo. And then actually I got to go on his ship, and I went out for a few maneuvers on the ship, on the USS Pargo, and got to experience that much smaller size submarine than the one I originally was on, much smaller than Lewis and Clark. So it was definitely a little change of experience being a much smaller ship and tighter crew.
And did you find, did you sail out, did you see the little one, was that a rougher ride than on the bigger one, or not, with submarines?
Not really. I mean, maybe a little bit based on how rough the North Atlantic is compared to, the southern United States, but not really. Didn't notice much of a difference. It still was getting my sea legs, I guess you could say.
You've
still getting
seen
used
one,
to
you've
it.
seen them all. Is that what you're saying?
Now,
Yeah.
I see that mentioned in here that you were on 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different submarines. I'm sure you didn't spend the entire 20 years confined in a submarine. There must have been some shore duty.
Right. So after while I was on Lewis and Clark, no, the USS Pargo when I was in Connecticut, my commanding officer said he submitted my name based on, I don't know what it was, I can't remember what the details were, up to the squadron, and I got a meeting with the squadron commander about a job that was open in Washington, D.C., and he was wondering if I would be interested in it, and I said, sure. I had no idea what it was for, or what I was going to be doing. I just knew it was something to do with admin, because I was a yeoman, so that was my profession. And he told me it was naval reactors, and I was like, well, I know my ship had a reactor. That's all I knew about reactors at that time. So I had no idea what I was getting myself into, but I learned a lot that I didn't even know I was going to learn before I left there. And in 1992, I transferred down to Washington, D.C., and I started working at Naval Reactors, which is the Navy headquarters for naval reactors, and they're all their officers and reactor duties and stuff. Naval reactors.
Now, when you went to the capital area, did you do any duty have any connection with the Pentagon?
Actually, when I worked there, I was the administrative assistant for a few engineers there, and also I was also the driver for a 4-star admiral, and he made many meetings and trips to the Pentagon, and I drove him. I was his personal driver over to the Pentagon pretty much on a daily basis. I was always going to the Pentagon, either doing a mail run or a courier run, or like I said, driving the admiral over for a meeting numerous times a day, or once or twice a day, or just once a week maybe sometimes. And I love that duty station. That was my first duty station. I think it spoiled me for all the rest of them. So, I mean, I really loved the job I was doing in the office, as well as the admiral's driver, and I got to meet some very high up naval officers and Navy admirals. And in that time, I also got to see and meet a lot of senators and congressmen, because we went up to Capitol Hill for different briefings. And I went over to the White House and met some White House staff. And I got to see some presidents from a distance. I never really got to shake their hands, but I got to see George Bush Sr. and Bill Clinton when they were the President of the United States, which is kind of impressive. And while I was there, I made numerous trips to the Andrews Air Force Base for the Admiral to fly in and out of from over there.
And did you ever go to Andrews for the funeral planes they bring in the fallen heroes?
No.
I didn't see that.
I never was involved in that.
I'm a little curious about going back to duty on board the submarine. How did you handle doing laundry? What about showering facilities? Did you have access to all the water that you wanted?
Water was limited, and for laundry, you were on a rotation. You could do laundry once a week, and you were on a schedule, and your pretty much bunk room and your bunk mates, and you were on a schedule. You could go and do your laundry for 30 minutes a week. It was you had to have 30 minutes scheduled out of the week to do your laundry, 30 minutes to an hour.
What about personal cleanliness, haircuts, visits to dentists? Did you have those opportunities on board submarines?
Nope, we had no dentists on submarines. That's why you did all your dental before you went out to sea and made sure that your dental class qualified to go out to sea. And as far as, showering and stuff on a submarine, you were limited to a short shower because the water was limited on a submarine. A lot of times their water was secured, so you had to just wash up with a washcloth or just like a bird bath type bath. And haircuts, usually somebody would volunteer to cut hair. One of your shipmates would volunteer to cut hair on board the submarine, and that person would cut hair usually on Saturdays when we had time off from different drills. They would just volunteer to cut hair, and you sign up on a list and you got your hair cut, and it was definitely no fancy haircut. You got whatever you were going to get.
And how did you master those straight step ladders? They had training for
The
that?
ladders, you just climb up and down the ladders, just get used to it after a while. Just learn not to bang your knees and you duck your head when you're going through hatches in small areas.
Now, a lot of people are just familiar with what they see on television or in the movies. What is it actually like when they prepare a submarine to go on a dive?
Well,
They see a lot of activity and chaos. I imagine it's
when
pretty.
submarine's getting ready to go out on a dive, there's a lot of almost every single submariner on board, all 100 plus men, all have jobs to do that have to be done prior to the ship actually going under. And they all have to report back to a central command that all their tasks are completed. And once all personnel have been accounted for, all tasks complete, then they can sign off telling the commander or the captain that the ship is ready to dive.
Now, did you have periodic general quarters drills?
Yes, we had different kind of drills. Every day we had fire drills, flooding drills, we had battle station drills, general quarters drills, pretty much on a daily basis except for Sundays, unless some mission required us to do drilling on Sundays.
Now, what is it like, if pressure on your ears when you're, the closest thing I say, if you're going up in an airplane, the higher you go, the altitude has an effect on your hearing. What is it like in a submarine?
Submarine is just like an airplane, but just in reverse. Instead of going up in altitude, you're going down in the water, and there's much more pressure the deeper you go.
How did they refresh the air in a submarine?
They come up to shallow enough to stick the snorkel mask out of the water, and they get fresh air through that mask, and they suck it in through machines and distribute it out.
Now, the crew members have to take turns on mess duty on board a submarine.
Yes, when you're new to a submarine, like I was back in Lewis and Clark, you were given your mess duty assignments, and based on what your expertise, your field was, you could mess duty for like 10 or 30 days up to 90 or 120 days based on what the need was at the time. And the average person did like 90 days of mess duty.
Did you serve in that? What did you do when
Yes.
your turn came?
Yep, I did my mess duty on Lewis and Clark, and part of that was when we were out to sea, and part was when we were in the shipyard. And one thing I definitely remember was I cut my fingers a lot when I was slicing tomatoes and getting the vegetables all cut up. I don't know what I was clumsy at the time, I guess.
Do you feel the rocking when you're deep under or not?
Not really, I never felt it much. Unless, it depends on the state of the ocean, if there's a storm above you, but most of the time you never even know that you're underwater.
It's interesting.
Now,
Good.
what about opportunities for relaxation on board a ship? You mentioned earlier that there were periods when you could do exercise, but did they have news that you could catch up on how things were back in the States?
Usually the radiomen, they would get message transmissions of some news and some sports, so you could see what's going on in the world. But that's about all the communication we had in the outside world. And then for relaxation, you could read books, or you could watch movies.
When you came into port, they always changed the movies, and
yes, and then we'd
never had any arguments.
We'd have a full loadout with the revisions of new movies before we go out to sea. Yeah.
Did they have periodic inspections on board the submarines, and what was an inspection like?
Well, we had numerous inspections, some engineering inspections based on how the engineering spaces operated and what the requirements were. We had weapons inspections based on what the weapons requirement were, and we also had personnel inspections, which were our uniforms and our sleeping quarters, make sure they were all clean and neat and presentable for any VIPs, or just if the command chief wanted to have an inspection, he would just, say he was going to have an inspection. You had to make sure your stuff was clean and neat. You always keep your stuff organized in your bunk area, always clean and neat. So.
Now, a lot of people see sailors, they say the uniforms are nice and clean and pressed and so forth. How did you press your uniforms? Did they rely on the old method of putting it under the mattress there, and your body sort of help smooth out wrinkles and all?
Well, when I was on submarines, you would iron your uniform, or you would make sure that you had it all pressed before you went out to sea, and then you would store it somewhere where it wouldn't get wrinkled, in a locker or in your foot locker, or someplace where you wouldn't get it all wrinkled.
It's hard for people to believe that you'd have to carry all of your personal equipment in what is known as a sea bag in the Navy, or in the other services, it's called a duffel bag. How easy is it to cram all that stuff in there?
You learn how to do it. You fold it, and you stuff everything in there, and it all fits.
My wife goes crazy when I'm still doing with the old habits that I learned in the Navy. You roll all your equipment so you take care of all the space you have.
The key is the folding technique, and you only bring what's necessary, what's required to bring. You don't bring extra shirts or pants. You just bring what's required of you, and that's it.
I'm curious, did you ever go on a submarine that's being launched, a brand new one, when you were in Connecticut by chance?
No, I never went on a new commissioned submarine. No.
Did you ever see one?
No, I would see them, in the paper or on the news, but I never actually attended any of the ceremonies.
No, we were
Always wanted to, but I never
I was
have.
wondering how the sailors could stand so still and straight as it went down the ramp out into the...
They said when it went down the slide, it picked up such speed that they would hit 30 miles an hour when they hit the water.
No, I believe
And
it.
those sailors
And they
never
stood like statues.
budged from there.
Yeah, definitely an impressive feat.
And you were lucky enough to not have to learn that.
Nope, I never had to do that.
Yeah, it's very... it was-
Now, were you able to bring civilian clothing with you, or was it strictly military clothing?
As you progressed in your rank and you gained privileges, you could get privilege to bring civilian clothes, especially if they told you that we were going to pull into a certain port of call that they knew of already ahead of time, or the possibility of pulling into one, so they would want to make sure that you would have a set of civilian clothes.
Now, when you're on shore duty, did you ever have any opportunities to have entertainment provided by the USO?
No.
No, you strictly relied on MRW.
Yeah, MWR.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Were there any unusual things that stand out in your tour of duty, ports of call that you went to, places that you visited? And what about the officer cadre? How were they?
Every one of my submarines, all the officer quarters were always very nice. Every officer I ran into or worked with was very professional and very courteous. I had no problems working with or dealing with any officer. I never had any conflicts with any. My ports of call, I enjoyed all the ones that we got to go to. Like I said, I went to Portugal. We were in Scotland. Went to Puerto Rico. And then my very last port of call was in Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, on the USS Georgia. And I really liked visiting Hawaii. I got to brag to my family that I was the only one to go to Hawaii, and I didn't have to pay for it.
Yeah.
Did you get to see, while you were out in Hawaii, did you get to visit the ships that were sunk?
Yes, I toured Arizona. I went over to Arizona, then the Utah,
Now
and the
you,
Missouri, of course.
you mentioned how you met some people who've become lifelong friends. Were you on these submarines, when you're on close quarters, I assume people have to cooperate with each other, and if they don't, what do you do, and how do you...
Well, since you're at close quarters, everyone has to get along, and if you don't get along, you just agree to disagree, and you just walk away. You just learn to turn the other cheek, and you walk away from a disagreement. But since you all have to rely on each other to survive and to live, you have to get along. There's no, not getting along. You have to get along.
So that's really a good life experience to have.
Yeah.
And then you mentioned you met some friends. Are you still in touch with these people?
Yes, I'm friends with a lot of my friends that I've met while I was in the Navy. I'm still in touch with a lot of them. A few I've lost contact with or have forgotten about, but I have a good core of probably like 50 friends that I kind of keep in touch with. But probably only 10 of them I really stay in touch with today and stuff.
And have you ever gotten together once I assume they've all left the military as well? Or
Some
not?
have retired, some have just gotten out of the military, short of retiring, or they just did their 4 years and got out.
Mm-hmm.
And they're scattered all around the country, and I've never gotten back with any of them since I retired myself. But I still keep in touch with them through internet or emails or phone calls and stuff. But yeah.
And so then you haven't been to any reunions of the...
No, I've not been to any of the ship's reunions, no.
Now, some of the funniest or most inspiring things that you've experienced in your service, you mentioned something about a halfway night celebration. What
Yes.
is that like?
On the
Yes.
Boomer submarine and the Trident submarines that I was on, we had, and as well as the other submarines, we had what they would call halfway night. It was kind of like a celebration for the crew of getting halfway through the scheduled mission or scheduled deployment. So you could kind of let your hair down and relax for a few hours. The captain would let us celebrate by having special foods, special games that people would play, watch movies, read books, kind of decorate your area around your bunk room or in the mess decks would be decorated for halfway night.
So what were some of the games you played on?
They would have, competition of that we would nominate people to wash dishes. Instead of we could relieve the mess crew, they would get a night off. So we'd nominate people to wash the dishes or smash the trash, or we'd pick people, or we would auction off pies that we could throw in people's faces.
I assume they were very, what would you say, conscious of debris. Did they have areas where they stored things that had to be offloaded?
Yes, all the trash was either stored in a certain location, or if it was going to be compacted, it was always sent to the compacting room.
What about religious opportunities? Did you have those things, such as being assistant to the chaplain or a lay leader?
Yes. I was actually fortunate on my last two submarines, since I'm a devout Catholic, I asked the chaplain if I could be a lay leader, and I went to training when I was in Kings Bay, Georgia, to be a lay leader, and I became the Catholic lay leader on the Kentucky, as well as I was also that on the Georgia, and we would perform services in the wardroom on Sundays, and I'd have my other lay leader friends where they had a Protestant lay leader, and I was a Catholic lay leader. Then they would have a non-denominational lay leader, a third one. As the years went by, they developed more lay leaders and stuff. And you would just coordinate with a chaplain before you went out to sea and what you needed for any prayer books or any things for preparation and stuff.
Now, on the submarine, I know on larger ships that they have opportunities to purchase goodies from the Gedunk stand and so forth. Did you ever have anything like that on board the submarine?
We had a very small version of that. We had our what they would call the rec committee would bring some candy on board and snacks and stuff, and people could buy those throughout, as long as we still had a supply of them.
Now, did you receive an allowance to replace clothing, or did you have to pay it out of your own monthly salary?
We had, you get a clothing allowance. The military gives you a clothing allowance for your anniversary of your enlistment, but otherwise you had to pay for your own clothes and stuff.
So how long were you in Pearl Harbor? How long was your duty there?
We were just there for a port visit. It was, I think,
Oh.
for a couple of days. Yeah.
Oh, so you really didn't get to see a lot of Hawaii. You were
No.
too busy looking at water under the sea.
How did you get from the East Coast out to the West Coast? How did the transfer come about?
I was stationed actually here in Ballston Spot on shore duty, and I got orders to USS Georgia, and I flew. Actually, I didn't fly. I actually drove. My wife and I drove across country with 2 cats. We drove out there to Silverdale, Washington.
And you go up to what, Bremerton?
Bangor, Washington.
Bangor,
yeah.
Washington?
And then from there. Now, have you, when you were released from the service, where did that take place?
In Groton, Connecticut.
Okay, right
Yep.
where you sort of started then.
Yes, I kind of left where I started.
Now,
Yeah.
did you, I'm sure that you didn't sign up for one 20-year hitch. You must have have
Yep.
done them in increments.
Right, yep. I signed up. I re-enlisted, I think, 3 times or 4 times. I can't remember the count. I lost count.
You did a full 20 years.
But yes, I did a full 28 years. Yeah.
Okay, now, once you've been out of the service, what have you been doing? What kind of work and what brought you to?
Since I've been out of the Navy, I have stayed in my profession of being an administrative support person or administrative officer.
Mm-hmm.
And I had 2 civilian jobs, and they kind of just went by the wayside.
Mm-hmm.
Then I was called by the VA, applied to an opening they had here at the VA, and I was accepted, and I've been here for the last few months.
And is there a certain reason why you chose when you left the service to be in this particular area, to live
You
here?
come back, your roots, you have roots back in this area?
I'm originally from upstate New York, so and my parents were there, so my wife and I decided to move back to upstate New York.
Okay.
Did your family ever have an opportunity to visit you on board ship? Did they have tours of the vessels?
And a couple of the submarines, my parents did come down and tour the submarine when they was in Connecticut, but they haven't been on any of the ones outside of the area, though.
We know that on submarines, particularly one my brother was on, they had what they called the Navy SEALs. Did you ever have compliments of Navy SEALs on board yours?
No, I was never lucky enough, or unlucky, I guess, to see the SEALs.
We were quite concerned to see the limited space that they had, and they were kept isolated from the regular crew on the submarines.
That's
that
what
we
I hear
saw.
about, yeah.
Okay, now have you, do you participate in any military organizations or any other volunteer type work since you've retired?
I haven't yet, but I might be doing some in the future.
Mhm.
I'd be interested in the future.
Okay.
Now, if you had to do it all over again, would you do the same thing?
Probably for the most part, with a few alterations, yes.
One thing we didn't get to, did you volunteer for submarine duty? Were you selected, how did you qualify to get into submarine duty? I'm sure it's pretty rigorous routine you have to go through.
I pretty much volunteered to be in the sub-fare program, and which was part of the submarine force. So that I just pretty much volunteered for it. Then I went through the screening, and I successfully passed through the screening, and then off I was going.
Mhm. Okay.
Now, can you give us a little idea of what it was like when you went through the submarine training course at New London, Connecticut? How rigorous was that?
There's a lot of classroom training, and there's a lot of trainer trainings where you had to learn how to fix leaks before you had to get out the water would overwhelm you and you would end up being underwater. And you had to go through firefighting training, as well as you had to go through this underwater trainer. It's called an escape trainer. You had to learn how to swim and hold your breath to get to the very top. And that was vigorous,
What was the
especially
longest?
for somebody who was a very good swimmer.
Yeah, what was the longest time you had to try to hold your breath to do that? What was the qualification?
I can't remember now.
Yeah.
Now, did they train you in escape techniques if you had to evacuate from the
Yes.
submarine?
Yep.
What was that like?
That was integrating. There was a lot of you had to learn how to hold your breath, or put on your mask and stuff, and you had to go learn how to go underwater, hold your breath, and learn how to exhale as you were going up and stuff.
I imagine they didn't told you that you could only go a limited amount of time in a certain period, not to try to go up as fast as you could.
Right. Yep. You had to go in certain, you go over, over a few seconds or minutes. You couldn't go up very fast, 'cause then you could get sick or something.
Did you ever have an opportunity to help you decompress? What they call the bends or so that they would get if they went too fast?
Right. Yeah. I never got that or had to do anything with that.
Did you know of any of your shipmates that went through that?
No.
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 So they all
Yeah,
pretty much
good
adhered to what
training.
they had to do.
Right. Yeah.
All right, they were good. Okay, is there anything else you want
And
to?
I can't think of it. We
Covered everything. It sounded like you had a good experience with the Navy, and I suppose that's why you made a career of it.
Yes, I enjoyed Submarine Force.
Yeah, that's good. Okay, well, we thank you very much for serving our country,
Thank you.
and